I pulled my weathered 2008 Honda Civic into the circular driveway of my brother's sprawling estate in Westchester County, the engine making that familiar rattling sound that had become the soundtrack to my supposed failures. The driveway was already filled with luxury vehicles: my sister Rachel's pristine white Lexus, my cousin Bradley's black BMW, and my Uncle Steven's cherry red Porsche that he'd bought after his latest real estate venture paid off. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The contrast was intentional on my part, though my family would never understand that. To them, my choice of vehicle was just another reminder of how I'd fallen short of the Anderson family legacy. They saw a man who couldn't afford better. I saw a man who had learned that the most important missions required the most inconspicuous transportation. My phone buzzed with a text from my nephew Kevin. "Uncle Mike, please tell me you're not wearing that old suit again." I glanced down at my simple navy suit from Men's Warehouse, the one I'd bought 3 years ago and had altered twice to keep it looking presentable. The fabric had held up well, though it certainly didn't have the custom tailoring of the suits hanging in my family's closets. What Kevin didn't know was that I had 17 identical suits hanging in my quarters at Fort Belvoir, each one carefully maintained by the same military precision that had governed my life for the past 23 years. Walking up the marble steps to Derek's front door, I could already hear the familiar sounds of an Anderson family gathering through the tall windows. Laughter, the clinking of expensive glassware, and the animated conversations about stock portfolios and business deals that had defined every family event since I was a child. These gatherings had become performance art, each family member playing their role in the theater of success, while I sat in the designated spot reserved for the family disappointment. The door opened before I could knock, revealing Derek's wife Amanda dressed in what I recognized as a designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was warm but carried that hint of pity I'd grown accustomed to seeing from my family members over the years. "Michael, you made it," she said, her voice carrying just enough enthusiasm to be polite but not enough to suggest she was genuinely excited about my presence. Everyone's in the living room. Derek just opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate his latest acquisition. I handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought, a modest $20 Pinot Noir from a local vineyard. She accepted it graciously, though I knew it would likely end up in the kitchen cabinet with the other backup wines, never to be opened while guests were present. What Amanda didn't know was that I'd chosen that particular vineyard because I'd served with the owner's son in Afghanistan, a young sergeant who'd saved 3 lives during an IED attack in Kandahar. The wine represented something far more valuable than the $100 bottles my family preferred. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful," Amanda said, already turning toward the kitchen. "Go ahead and join everyone. I think your father wanted to talk to you about something." The living room was exactly as I had expected. Derek stood near the massive stone fireplace, his custom-tailored suit perfectly fitted to his tall frame, gesturing animatedly as he described his latest business triumph to our gathered relatives. My father, Robert Anderson, sat in his favorite leather armchair, the same one he'd occupied during every family gathering for the past 15 years. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his expensive watch caught the light as he raised his glass of what I knew would be top-shelf whiskey. "Michael," my father called out as I entered the room, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested he was about to deliver one of his famous life lessons. "Come here, son. We were just discussing the importance of adapting to market changes." Rachel looked up from her conversation with our cousin Bradley, her emerald earrings catching the light as she turned her head. She was the picture of success in her silk blouse and perfectly applied makeup, every inch the successful marketing executive she'd become. What struck me wasn't her appearance, but the way her expression subtly shifted when she saw me, as if she were mentally calculating how to minimize any potential embarrassment my presence might cause. "Uncle Mike!" Kevin bounded over, his 22-year-old energy barely contained in his designer jeans and polo shirt. Fresh out of college with a finance degree, he'd already landed a position at a prestigious investment firm through family connections. "I was just telling everyone about my new apartment in Manhattan. You should see the view from the 32nd floor." I accepted his enthusiastic hug, genuinely pleased to see him despite the circumstances. Kevin had always been the one family member who treated me with unfiltered affection, though I could see that his college years had begun to influence his perspective on success and failure. That sounds wonderful, Kevin. Manhattan real estate is certainly competitive. Oh, it is, he said, his voice dropping slightly as if he were about to share insider information. But Dad helped me understand the market dynamics. You really need to think strategically about these things. Bradley approached with his characteristic swagger, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd made his fortune in cryptocurrency investments, getting in early on Bitcoin and riding the wave to multi-million-dollar success. His wealth was new enough that he still felt the need to remind everyone about it regularly. "Mike, good to see you," he said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "Still working at that government job?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but I could hear the underlying assumption. In the Anderson family lexicon, government job was code for secure but unremarkable position that pays just enough to get by. They imagined me sitting behind a desk at some federal agency, processing paperwork and counting the years until retirement. "Yes, still with the government," I replied simply, accepting his handshake. "It keeps me busy." Derek chose that moment to raise his voice slightly, ensuring the entire room could hear his latest news. "I have to say, family, this year has been exceptional for Anderson Development. We just closed on the Morrison Building downtown, a $40 million deal that's going to anchor our expansion into commercial real estate." The room erupted in congratulations and questions about the details. I watched as my father's chest visibly swelled with pride, his older son once again proving that the Anderson business acumen had been passed down successfully. Derek had always been the golden child, the one who'd followed our father into real estate development and exceeded every expectation. $40 million, my Uncle Stephen whistled appreciatively. "That's quite a leap from residential development." "It's all about recognizing opportunities," Derek explained, his voice taking on the lecturing tone that had become his trademark at family gatherings. "The key is having the capital and the vision to act when others hesitate." Rachel joined the conversation, her marketing expertise adding professional credibility to the discussion. "The timing couldn't be better. Our firm just landed the advertising contract for 3 major developments in the tri-state area. The commercial real estate market is about to explode." I stood quietly near the edge of the group, nursing the glass of wine that Amanda had handed me when I arrived. This was my designated role at these gatherings, the appreciative audience member who nodded at appropriate moments and asked polite questions about ventures I could never afford to pursue myself. "Michael," my father said, his voice cutting through the business discussion, "how's your work situation? Are you still in that same position?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every family member turned toward me, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed pity. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the opportunity to contrast their successes with my apparent lack of progress. "I'm doing well, Dad. Still serving my country." "Serving your country," Bradley repeated, his tone suggesting he found the phrase quaint. "That's admirable, Mike, but at some point you have to think about your financial future. Government pensions aren't what they used to be." Rachel nodded in agreement, her expression shifting into what I recognized as her helpful sister mode. "Michael, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I know some people in corporate communications who might be able to help you transition into the private sector. The experience you have could be valuable in the right context." Kevin, ever the enthusiastic recent graduate, jumped into the conversation. "Uncle Mike, have you ever thought about getting an MBA? I mean, you're still young enough to make a career change. Some of my professors were talking about how military experience can be really valuable in business school applications." The suggestions came with good intentions, but each one carried the implicit assumption that my current path was inadequate. They saw a man in his 40s who'd never progressed beyond middle management, someone who'd chosen security over ambition, and was now facing the consequences of that choice. My Uncle Stephen, emboldened by his recent success in real estate ventures, decided to offer his own perspective. "Mike, I've been in business for 30 years, and I can tell you that the biggest mistake people make is getting comfortable with mediocrity. You've got to be willing to take risks if you want to build real wealth." "Absolutely," Derek agreed, his success making him feel qualified to dispense wisdom. The government job is fine for stability, but you're never going to build generational wealth working for someone else. The Andersons have always been entrepreneurs. I nodded politely, the same response I'd given to variations of this lecture for the past 2 decades. What they didn't understand was that some forms of service require sacrifices that can't be measured in stock portfolios or real estate holdings. My choice to serve hadn't been about financial security. It had been about something far more fundamental. I appreciate the advice, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm content with my current situation. The word content seemed to strike them as particularly troubling. In the Anderson family vocabulary, contentment was synonymous with giving up. They believed in constant growth, perpetual advancement, and the relentless pursuit of more. Content? Rachel repeated, her voice carrying a note of concern. Michael, you're 43 years old. Shouldn't you be thinking about advancement? About building something for the future? My father leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious. Son, I've been thinking about this for a while now. Your mother and I are worried about you. We see Derek succeeding in business, Rachel building her career, and we want the same kind of success for you. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What Dad's trying to say, Derek interjected, is that we're here to help. If you're interested in learning about real estate development, I'd be happy to show you the ropes. It's not too late to start building something significant. The offer was genuine, and I could see that it came from a place of family concern rather than condescension. But it also revealed how completely they misunderstood my life and my choices. They saw a man who'd settled for less when he could have achieved more. They couldn't conceive of a different definition of achievement. Amanda appeared in the doorway, announcing that dinner was ready. The family began moving toward the dining room, their conversation shifting to lighter topics as they anticipated the meal. I followed behind, observing the easy camaraderie that came from shared values and mutual respect for each other's accomplishments. The dining room table was set with Amanda's finest china, crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead, and silver place settings that probably cost more than my monthly housing allowance. Fresh flowers from Amanda's garden created an elegant centerpiece, and the aroma of roasted lamb filled the air. As we took our seats, I found myself in the familiar position between my father and Kevin, close enough to be included in conversations but positioned where my presence wouldn't dominate the evening. Derek sat at the head of the table, his success earning him the position of family patriarch despite being younger than me by 2 years. The meal began with the usual family updates. Rachel described her latest marketing campaign for a luxury hotel chain, complete with details about the celebrity endorsements and social media strategy. Bradley shared stories about his latest cryptocurrency investments, explaining blockchain technology to anyone who would listen. Kevin talked about his new job, the apartment he was furnishing, and the young woman he'd started dating. So Michael, Amanda said during a lull in the conversation, tell us about your work. Are you still in Washington? I spend time in various locations, I replied, cutting a piece of lamb. The job requires flexibility. That must be difficult, she said sympathetically. All that travel, never knowing where you'll be next, it's hard to build a stable life that way. Rachel nodded in agreement. Michael, have you ever thought about requesting a transfer to a more stable position? Something that would allow you to settle down, maybe start a family? The question hit closer to home than she realized. I had started a family, in a way. I had 30,000 soldiers under my command. Young men and women who depended on my leadership and judgment. I had a responsibility that extended far beyond personal comfort or financial gain. I'm fulfilled by my current responsibilities, I said simply. But what about your future? My father pressed. You can't do this forever. What happens when you retire? What will you have to show for all those years of service? The question revealed the fundamental disconnect between their values and mine. They measured success in assets and achievements that could be quantified and displayed. They couldn't understand that some accomplishments couldn't be hung on a wall or deposited in a bank account. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it discreetly, noting that it was from my aide-de-camp, Colonel Patricia Walsh. The message was brief. "Sir, an urgent situation is developing. Need your authorization for Operation Nightfall. Can you take a secure call?" I looked around the table at my family, all of them engaged in animated conversations about business deals and career prospects. None of them had noticed my brief distraction. None of them realized that the man they saw as a middle-aged government employee was about to make a decision that would affect international security. "Excuse me," I said, standing up from the table. "I need to take this call." My father frowned slightly. "Michael, we're in the middle of dinner." "It's important, Dad. I'll be quick." As I walked toward the study, I could hear Derek's voice behind me, speaking in the tone adults use when discussing a child's behavior. He's always been like this. Never learned proper priorities. I stepped into Derek's study, closing the door behind me and activating the secure communication app on my phone. Within seconds, I was connected to the Pentagon's Joint Operations Center, where Colonel Walsh was waiting with a briefing that would determine the fate of a hostage situation unfolding in Eastern Europe. The conversation that followed was conducted in the professional shorthand of military command. Troop movements, extraction protocols, rules of engagement, the language of decisions that carried life and death consequences. Through the study window, I could see my family continuing their dinner, oblivious to the fact that their unsuccessful relative was coordinating an international military operation from Derek's home office. When I returned to the dining room 5 minutes later, the conversation had moved on to vacation plans and investment strategies. I slipped back into my seat, noting that no one had really noticed my absence except Kevin, who gave me a curious look. "Everything okay, Uncle Mike?" he asked quietly. "Just work," I replied, picking up my fork. Nothing that couldn't wait until after dinner. The lie came easily, a necessary deception that protected both my family's peace of mind and operational security. They would never understand the weight of the decisions I made daily, the lives that hung in the balance of my judgment calls. As the evening continued, I found myself observing my family with new eyes. They were good people, successful in their own right, but limited by their narrow definition of achievement. They saw the world through the lens of personal gain and individual success, unable to comprehend the satisfaction that came from service to something greater than oneself. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man they pitied for his lack of ambition commanded more resources than all of them combined. The government job they saw as a dead end had given me responsibility for operations that shaped global events. The simple suit they found embarrassing was the civilian equivalent of a uniform that carried the weight of American military authority. But none of that mattered, not really. What mattered was that I had chosen a path that aligned with my values, regardless of how others perceived it. The respect of my family would be nice, but it wasn't necessary for my sense of purpose or self-worth. As Amanda served dessert and the conversation turned to weekend plans, I sat quietly and listened, knowing that soon enough they would understand exactly who they had been lecturing about success and ambition. But for now, I was content to let them believe what they needed to believe, secure in the knowledge that true strength often comes disguised as weakness. After dessert, the family migrated to Derek's expansive backyard patio, where strings of elegant lights created an intimate atmosphere against the backdrop of his manicured gardens. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly maintained lawn that stretched toward a small pond at the property's edge. Derek had spared no expense in creating what he called his entertainment sanctuary, complete with a built-in barbecue station, a fire pit surrounded by comfortable seating, and an outdoor bar that rivaled anything you'd find at an upscale restaurant. "This is really something, Derek," Uncle Stephen said, running his hand along the granite countertop of the outdoor kitchen. "What did this whole setup run you?" Derek's chest puffed with pride as he began detailing the renovation costs. The landscaping alone was $60,000, but Amanda and I decided it was worth the investment. When you're entertaining clients, you want to make an impression. Rachel settled into one of the plush outdoor sofas, her wine glass catching the light as she gestured toward the pool house. "I love what you've done with the lighting. Very sophisticated." We should feature something like this in our next luxury lifestyle campaign. Kevin was already exploring the outdoor sound system, his phone connected via Bluetooth, as he queued up what he called his networking playlist, a carefully curated selection of jazz and contemporary music designed to facilitate business conversations. At 22, he'd already learned that every social gathering was an opportunity to practice the art of professional relationship building. "Uncle Mike, come check this out," Kevin called, waving me over to the fire pit area. Derek had this whole thing custom designed. The fire pit connects to natural gas, so there's no mess with wood or charcoal. I joined him, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship, even as I couldn't help thinking about the young soldiers I'd served with who would have been thrilled to have any kind of reliable heat source during those cold nights in mountainous regions overseas. The contrast between worlds wasn't lost on me, but I'd learned long ago that perspective was something that couldn't be taught, only earned. "It's very well done," I said, accepting the fresh drink that Amanda offered as she made her rounds, playing the perfect hostess. "You and Derek have created something special here." Bradley appeared beside us, his third bourbon of the evening having loosened his tongue considerably. "You know, Mike, this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say you need to think bigger." Derek didn't build this by playing it safe with some government salary. Derek overheard and approached our group, clearly enjoying the opportunity to hold court about his success. "That's the thing about real estate development. You have to be willing to leverage your resources. I put everything on the line for my first commercial deal, and it paid off exponentially." "Risk tolerance," Rachel added, joining the conversation. "That's what separates successful people from those who just get by. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty if you want extraordinary returns." My father, who had been quietly observing from his position near the outdoor bar, decided to join what was clearly becoming an impromptu seminar on financial success. "Michael, this is exactly what we've been trying to tell you for years. Your brothers and sister understand that security and success aren't the same thing." The phrase brothers and sister stung more than I expected. My father had a way of speaking about Derek and Rachel that implied they were the real children, the ones who had inherited the family's business acumen, while I was somehow separate from that legacy. "Dad," Derek said, his tone diplomatic but firm, "Mike's made his choices. We can't force someone to want more than they're comfortable with." The comment was meant to be supportive, but it carried an undertone that was even more condescending than direct criticism. Derek was essentially saying that my limitations weren't a matter of capability but of character, that I simply lacked the ambition that drove successful people. "I just think it's sad," Rachel said, her voice taking on the tone she used when discussing disappointing quarterly reports. "Michael's intelligent, he's capable, but he's chosen to settle for mediocrity. It's like watching someone with natural athletic ability choose to sit on the bench." Amanda, ever the gracious hostess, attempted to redirect the conversation. "Maybe we should talk about something else. Michael, didn't you say you've been doing some traveling for work? That must be interesting." "Government travel," Bradley said with a dismissive wave. "Probably attending conferences in places like Cleveland or Phoenix. No offense, Mike, but that's not exactly the kind of travel that broadens your horizons." Kevin, still young enough to be curious rather than judgmental, asked, "What kind of conferences, Uncle Mike? What does your department actually do?" The question was innocent, but it created an opening that my family immediately seized upon. They'd been wondering about the specifics of my work for years, but had been too polite to ask directly. Now, with Kevin leading the charge, they felt free to probe. "Yes, Michael," my father said, settling into his outdoor chair with the air of someone preparing for a long overdue conversation. "We've never really understood what you do day to day. After all these years, don't you think it's time we knew more about your actual responsibilities?" I found myself at a crossroads that had been 20 years in the making. The simple truth was that I couldn't explain my actual responsibilities without revealing classified information. The complex truth was that even if I could, they wouldn't believe it. Their mental image of me was so firmly established that contradictory information would simply be dismissed as exaggeration or fantasy. "I work in operations coordination," I said, choosing my words carefully. "A lot of logistics planning, personnel management, strategic planning." "Operations coordination," Stephen repeated slowly, as if testing the phrase for signs of importance. "That sounds like middle management to me. How many people do you supervise?" The question was a trap disguised as curiosity. In the Anderson family worldview, authority was measured by the number of people you controlled and the size of the budgets you managed. They wanted to quantify my position in terms they could understand and compare to their own achievements. It varies depending on the operation, I replied. Technically accurate, but deliberately vague. Varies? Derek pressed. Come on, Mike, you must have some idea. Are we talking about a team of 5, 10, 20 people? Rachel leaned forward, her marketing instincts sensing an opportunity to gather intelligence. And what's your budget authority? I mean, in my position, I'm responsible for campaigns worth millions of dollars. It would help us understand your role better if we knew the scale you're working with. The irony was profound. Rachel was proud of managing million-dollar marketing campaigns, while my last operational authorization had involved a budget larger than the GDP of some small countries. But the classification levels made it impossible to share those details, even with family. Budgets can be complicated in government work, I said. There are different funding streams, various authorization levels. That's bureaucracy for you, Bradley said with the confidence of someone who'd never worked within large organizational structures. Everything's compartmentalized so nobody really has clear authority. No wonder nothing gets done efficiently. Kevin, emboldened by the adult's willingness to probe, asked, Uncle Mike, have you ever thought about going back to school? Getting an MBA or something that would help you move into private sector management? The suggestion that I needed more education to qualify for real responsibility was particularly galling, given that I held advanced degrees from both West Point and the War College, along with specialized training in counterterrorism, international relations, and strategic planning that wasn't available at any civilian institution. I've had extensive professional development opportunities through my work, I said. Professional development, my father repeated with barely concealed skepticism. Michael, at some point you need to face reality. You're in your 40s, you're still in what sounds like a middle management position, and you're apparently content to stay there indefinitely. Derek decided to take a more direct approach. Mike, I'm going to be blunt because I care about you, your family, and I hate seeing you waste your potential. Why don't you come work for Anderson Development? I could start you in project management, teach you the business from the ground up. The offer was genuine, and I could see that Derek truly believed he was extending a lifeline to his struggling older brother. In his mind, he was offering me the chance to finally achieve something meaningful, to join the family tradition of building wealth and creating a legacy. I appreciate the offer, Derek, but I'm committed to my current position. Committed to what? Rachel asked, her frustration finally showing. Michael, what exactly are you committed to? What are you building? What legacy are you creating? The questions struck at the heart of everything that separated my life from theirs. They measured legacy in terms of personal wealth, property ownership, and business success. They couldn't conceive of a legacy built on service, on decisions that protected democracy and saved lives, on responsibilities that extended far beyond personal gain. Some things are worth doing regardless of the financial rewards, I said quietly. That's a luxury perspective, Stephen said dismissively. Easy to talk about higher purposes when someone else is paying your bills. But at the end of the day, you need to take care of yourself and your future. Bradley nodded in agreement. Mike, I get the whole service to country thing, but you can serve your country better if you're financially successful. Look at how much money Derek donates to veterans organizations. He's able to make a real impact because he built wealth first. The comment revealed how completely they misunderstood both service and impact. Derek's donations were admirable, but they were a fraction of what I influenced through my position. The resources I controlled, the lives I protected, the strategic decisions I made, none of that registered in their calculation of contribution or success. Amanda, sensing the growing tension, attempted another redirect. Why don't we talk about vacation plans? Derek and I are thinking about renting a villa in Tuscany this fall, but the family had found their topic and weren't ready to let it go. This was the conversation they'd been wanting to have for years, and my presence had finally given them the opportunity to stage what amounted to an intervention. Actually, Rachel said, I think this is important. Michael, we love you, but we're worried about you. You seem isolated, you won't talk about your work in any detail, and you appear to have no plan for advancement or retirement. It's like you've given up, Kevin added, his youthful earnestness making the comment even more painful. Like you've decided that mediocrity is enough. My father set down his drink and looked directly at me. Son, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Are you happy with your life? Are you satisfied with what you've accomplished? The question hung in the evening air like a challenge. Around me, my family waited for an answer that would either justify their concern or prove their point about my limitations. They wanted to know if I was happy, but they'd already decided that happiness without conventional success was a form of self-deception. What they couldn't understand was that happiness and satisfaction had nothing to do with their approval or their definition of achievement. I was leading a life of purpose and responsibility that they couldn't imagine, making decisions that shaped global events, commanding the respect of world leaders and military personnel across 6 continents. But none of that could be explained without revealing information that was classified at the highest levels. So I sat quietly as my family waited for an answer, knowing that the truth would remain hidden until circumstances forced it into the open. The silence stretched uncomfortably as my father waited for my answer about happiness and satisfaction. The evening breeze rustled through Derek's perfectly manicured hedges, and somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked twice before falling quiet again. The family's expectant faces were illuminated by the soft glow of the patio lights, each one wearing an expression that suggested they already knew what my answer should be. I find meaning in my work, I said finally, choosing my words with the same precision I used when briefing congressional committees on sensitive operations. Meaning, Bradley repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. Mike, meaning don't pay for retirement. Meaning doesn't build equity. You can find meaning volunteering at a soup kitchen, but that doesn't make it a career strategy. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps sensing that the adults were pushing too hard, but not yet confident enough in his own opinions to challenge them. Uncle Mike, I don't think they're trying to attack your choices. It's just, don't you want financial security? I have financial security, I replied, thinking about the military pension that would rival most of their annual incomes, not to mention the other benefits that came with my rank and years of service. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mike, driving a 15-year-old Honda doesn't exactly scream financial security. When's the last time you took a real vacation? When's the last time you bought something substantial without worrying about the cost? The questions revealed how completely they'd misunderstood my lifestyle choices. Last month, I spent a weekend at Camp David with the president and his national security team, discussing counterterrorism strategies that would affect 3 different continents. 2 weeks before that, I'd been in a private meeting with the Secretary of Defense, reviewing operational readiness reports that influenced billions of dollars in military spending. But to them, security meant visible consumption and status symbols. They couldn't comprehend that real power often operated quietly, without fanfare or public recognition. I take vacations when my schedule permits, I said, remembering the brief respite I'd taken in the Swiss Alps after completing a particularly challenging NATO operation, though I certainly couldn't share those details. Rachel leaned forward, her expression shifting into what I recognized as her tough love mode. Michael, we need to talk about your future realistically. You're 43 years old, you're single, you have no children, and as far as we can tell, no significant assets. What happens when you're 65 and ready to retire? The assumption that I was single struck me as particularly ironic. For the past 18 months, I'd been quietly seeing Dr. Sarah Chen, a brilliant State Department analyst who specialized in East Asian affairs. Our relationship had to remain discreet due to both of our security clearances, but she understood the demands of my position in ways my family never could. I've made appropriate preparations for retirement, I said, thinking about the comprehensive benefits package that came with decades of military service, including healthcare and pension benefits that far exceeded anything available in the private sector. Appropriate preparations, my father said with a bitter laugh. Son, do you know what Derek's net worth is? Do you know what Rachel earns annually? Do you have any idea how far behind you've fallen? The question stung not because it was true, but because it revealed how my father measured worth. In his mind, Derek's real estate empire and Rachel's marketing salary were the metrics that mattered. Military rank, strategic responsibility, and national service were abstract concepts that carried no weight in his calculation of success. Uncle Stephen, emboldened by his recent wine consumption, decided to add his perspective. Mike, I'm going to tell you something that might be hard to hear, but someone needs to say it. You've become the family disappointment. At every gathering, people ask about Derek's latest deal or Rachel's promotion, and then they ask about you, and we have to make excuses. The brutality of the statement was shocking, even coming from Stephen, who'd never been known for his tact. But what made it worse was the nods of agreement from around the circle. They'd clearly discussed this among themselves, probably during previous gatherings when I wasn't present. That's harsh, Stephen, Amanda said weakly, but she didn't contradict the sentiment. Sometimes harsh is necessary, Rachel said, her voice taking on the tone she used during difficult client conversations. Michael, you need to understand how this looks from the outside. We have successful professionals in this family, people who've built something meaningful, and then we have whatever it is you're doing. Kevin, perhaps trying to soften the blow, added, Uncle Mike, it's not that we don't respect government service, it's just that you seem stuck. Like, shouldn't you be promoted by now? Shouldn't you have some kind of leadership position after all these years? The irony was so profound it was almost amusing. Kevin was asking if I should have a leadership position while I commanded more personnel than most corporate CEOs would ever dream of managing. But military hierarchy and civilian business structures were completely different worlds, and the classification requirements made it impossible to bridge that gap. Government advancement works differently than private sector promotion, I said, maintaining the same calm tone I used during hostile congressional hearings. Differently how? Derek pressed. Come on, Mike, we're family. You can tell us what level you've actually reached. Are you a supervisor? A department head? What's your actual title? The question of title was loaded with assumptions about how authority worked. In their world, titles were everything. Vice president, senior partner, executive director. They needed those labels to understand where someone fit in the hierarchy of success. My title is somewhat technical, I said, which was true enough. Major general would be meaningless to them without context, and the context was precisely what I couldn't provide. Technical, Bradley said dismissively. That's government speaks for glorified middle management. Mike, in the real world, either you're running something or you're working for someone who is. Which one are you? The question demanded a binary answer that didn't reflect the complexity of military command structure. I was simultaneously working for people above me in the chain of command while running operations that affected global security. But explaining that would require revealing classified information about my actual role and responsibilities. Command structures in government are more complex than simple hierarchies, I said. Complex, my father repeated with obvious frustration. Michael, why can't you give us a straight answer about anything? It's like you're deliberately being evasive. Rachel nodded in agreement. It's been like this for years, Dad. Ask Michael anything specific about his work, his responsibilities, his advancement potential, and he gives these vague, non-committal answers. Maybe because there's nothing specific to share, Stephen said with cruel precision. Maybe he's embarrassed to admit that after 20-plus years in government work, he's still essentially a clerk with a fancy title. The accusation hit home not because it was accurate, but because it revealed how completely they'd written off my career. In their minds, I'd already been categorized as the family failure, and every conversation was just another opportunity to confirm their preconceptions. Kevin, perhaps uncomfortable with the increasingly personal attacks, tried to change the subject. Well, Uncle Mike seems happy with his choices. Maybe that's what matters. Happy, Derek said with obvious disdain. Kevin, happiness without achievement is just self-deception. You can be happy working at McDonald's, but that doesn't make it a worthwhile career. The comparison to fast food work was deliberately insulting, and the message was clear. They viewed my government position as essentially equivalent to entry-level service work. 23 years of military service, multiple combat deployments, strategic command responsibilities, all of it dismissed as the equivalent of flipping burgers. Some people are just wired differently, Rachel said with the tone of someone delivering a psychological diagnosis. Some people are driven to excel, to compete, to build something significant. Others are content with security and routine. It's genetic, Bradley added with the confidence of someone who'd read a few business psychology articles. Look at this family. We've got entrepreneurs, executives, innovators. And then we have Mike, who chose the government track because it was safe and predictable. The analysis was so fundamentally wrong that I almost laughed. There was nothing safe or predictable about the decisions I made daily, the operations I authorized, the strategic risks I calculated. But their narrow definition of risk was limited to financial investment and business ventures. Amanda, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, made another attempt at diplomacy. Maybe we should respect Michael's choices, even if we don't understand them. Respect, my father said bitterly. How can you respect choices that waste potential? How can you respect someone who's content with mediocrity when they could achieve excellence? The word mediocrity hung in the air like an indictment. That's what they saw when they looked at me, a man who'd chosen the easy path, who'd settled for less than his potential, who'd disappointed everyone who'd believed in him. What they couldn't see was the weight of responsibility I carried, the lives that depended on my decisions, the strategic operations that required my authorization. They couldn't understand that some forms of excellence operated in shadows, that some achievements could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated at family dinners. As the evening grew later and the criticism grew sharper, I sat quietly and absorbed their disappointment, knowing that soon enough they would understand exactly how wrong their assumptions had been. But for now, I let them believe what they needed to believe, secure in the knowledge that true strength often appears as weakness to those who don't understand its source. The patio had grown quieter as the evening progressed, the initial energy of the gathering replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to settle over the family like a heavy blanket. Derek's elaborate outdoor sound system continued playing its carefully curated jazz playlist, but the music felt incongruous against the sharp edges of the conversation that had just concluded. Kevin had retreated to his phone, presumably scrolling through social media to avoid the awkwardness that his elders had created. Amanda busied herself collecting empty glasses and plates, her hostess instincts providing a convenient escape from the family dynamics she clearly found distressing. The rest of the family seemed content to let the criticism of my life choices hang in the air like smoke from Derek's expensive citronella candles. I was checking my own phone when the first message came through on my encrypted communication app. It was from Colonel Patricia Walsh, my aide-de-camp, and the message was marked with the red priority indicator that meant urgent action required. Sir, the developing situation in the Baltic region. NATO command requesting immediate consultation on Article 5 implications. Secretary Austin's office has been trying to reach you. I read the message twice, my military training automatically shifting my mindset from family gathering to operational readiness. The mention of Article 5 NATO's Collective Defense Clause meant this wasn't a routine consultation. Something significant was happening that requires my immediate attention and expertise. Before I could respond, a second message appeared. This one from General Marcus Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The fact that the chairman was reaching out directly on a Saturday evening meant the situation had escalated beyond normal channels. Mike, need you on a secure line ASAP. Russian naval movements in the Baltic have triggered early warning protocols. POTUS wants options brief by 0800 tomorrow. The acronym POTUS, President of the United States, appeared on my phone screen just as Rachel was launching into another critique about my apparent lack of ambition. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was questioning my career trajectory while the President of the United States was requesting my strategic assessment of a potential international crisis. A third message arrived, this one from Admiral Catherine Rodriguez, commander of NATO Joint Force Command. General Anderson, urgent consultation needed on Baltic Fleet positioning. Can you join emergency session at 2100 hours? The use of my rank in the message was automatic among military personnel, but seeing General Anderson on my phone screen while sitting among family members who thought I was a mid-level bureaucrat created a surreal disconnect between my two worlds. Michael, my father was saying, apparently continuing a conversation I'd missed while reading my messages. Are you even listening? We're trying to have a serious discussion about your future. I looked up from my phone to find the entire family staring at me with varying degrees of frustration and disappointment. Clearly, my momentary distraction had been interpreted as disrespect or disinterest in their concerns about my life choices. I'm sorry, I was reading something important, I said, sliding my phone face down on the patio table. Important, Derek said with obvious skepticism. What could possibly be so important that it can't wait until after our family conversation? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Secure Pentagon, which was how calls from the Pentagon's Operations Center appeared on my encrypted device. The fact that they were calling directly rather than messaging meant the situation had escalated even further. "I need to take this," I said, standing up and reaching for my phone. "Michael," my mother's voice carried a note of exasperation, "we're in the middle of a family discussion. Surely whatever work issue this is can wait until Monday." The suggestion that a Pentagon call could wait until Monday revealed how completely she misunderstood the nature of my responsibilities. International crises didn't observe weekend schedules, and military command didn't operate on civilian business hours. "This really can't wait," I said, answering the call as I walked toward the edge of the patio for privacy. "General Anderson," came the crisp voice of Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell from the Pentagon's Watch Center. "We have a developing situation that requires your immediate assessment." Behind me, I could hear Derek's voice rising slightly as he spoke to the rest of the family. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. He can't even stay focused during a family conversation without getting distracted by whatever administrative crisis has come up." Colonel Mitchell was briefing me on Russian submarine movements that had triggered automated early warning systems across 3 NATO countries. The situation required immediate strategic assessment and recommendations for potential response protocols. As he spoke, I found myself automatically shifting into the analytical mindset that had guided me through dozens of similar crisis situations over the past 2 decades. "Sir," Colonel Mitchell continued, "the National Security Council is convening an emergency session at 2200 hours. Your presence is requested for the strategic assessment portion of the briefing." "Understood," I replied quietly, checking my watch and calculating travel time to Washington. "I'll need 40 minutes to reach a secure location for detailed briefing materials." "Roger that, sir. The Situation Room will patch you through to the preliminary assessment team in 30 minutes. Also, General Harrison specifically requested that you review the submarine tracking data before the NSC meeting." As I ended the call and turned back toward my family, I could see that my absence from their conversation had not gone unnoticed. Rachel was shaking her head in obvious disapproval, while my father wore the expression of someone whose patience had been thoroughly exhausted. "Let me guess," Bradley said as I approached the group. "Some urgent paperwork that absolutely couldn't wait until Monday morning." The assumption that Pentagon emergency briefings constituted paperwork was so fundamentally wrong that I almost smiled despite the gravity of the situation I'd just been briefed on. But explaining the reality would require revealing classified information about military operations and my role in national security decision-making. "Something like that," I said, knowing the vague response would only reinforce their assumptions about my work. Kevin looked up from his phone with curiosity rather than irritation. "Uncle Mike, who calls about work stuff on Saturday night? That seems kind of intense for a government job." The question was innocent enough, but it highlighted the disconnect between their perception of government work and the reality of military command responsibilities. In their minds, government employees worked Monday through Friday, took regular lunch breaks, and certainly didn't receive emergency calls that required immediate strategic assessments. "Different departments have different schedules," I said, which was technically accurate while being completely unhelpful. "Different schedules," my father repeated, with obvious frustration. "Michael, normal people don't get work calls during family dinners. Normal people can disconnect from their jobs for a few hours to focus on their families." The criticism stung because it revealed how they interpreted my dedication to duty. They saw someone who couldn't set appropriate boundaries, who allowed himself to be taken advantage of by demanding supervisors. They couldn't understand that some responsibilities transcended personal convenience or family gatherings. My phone buzzed again with another encrypted message, this one from Dr. Sarah Chen at the State Department. "Mike, seeing unusual diplomatic traffic from Moscow. Is DoD tracking something in the Baltic? My contacts are asking questions." The fact that State Department analysts were noticing increased diplomatic activity confirmed that the situation was expanding beyond purely military concerns. This was exactly the kind of multi-agency crisis that required coordinated response from both Defense and State Department leadership. "Another call?" Rachel asked sarcastically as she watched me check my phone. Just a message, I replied, but I could see that even checking my phone was being interpreted as further evidence of my inability to prioritize family over work. Derek decided to address the situation directly. Mike, I'm going to be honest with you. This constant phone checking, these mysterious work calls, this inability to be present for family conversations, it's disrespectful and it's concerning. Concerning how? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. It suggests that you've become so dependent on feeling important at work that you can't function in normal social situations. Derek explained, his real estate developer confidence making him feel qualified to diagnose my psychological state. You're using work as an escape from dealing with real-life issues. The analysis was so completely backwards that I found myself momentarily speechless. Derek was suggesting that I used work to feel important, when the reality was that my work carried genuine importance that affected international security and global stability. Amanda, perhaps sensing that the conversation was heading toward another confrontation, suggested, maybe we should move inside for coffee? It's getting a bit cool out here. But the family seemed determined to pursue their intervention to its logical conclusion. They'd been building up to this conversation for years, and my apparent work obsession had given them the perfect opening to address what they saw as my fundamental life problems. No, Amanda, I think we need to finish this conversation, my father said firmly. Michael, your work-life balance is obviously completely out of control. No healthy job requires this level of availability. The statement revealed how thoroughly they misunderstood the nature of military service and national security responsibilities. They were applying civilian workplace standards to a career that operated by completely different rules and requirements. As if summoned by their criticism, my phone rang again with another Pentagon call. This time, the caller ID showed the direct line for the Secretary of Defense's office, which meant the situation had escalated to the highest levels of military leadership. I looked around at my family's expectant faces, knowing that taking this call would confirm every negative assumption they'd made about my priorities and my character. But I also knew that the call represented responsibilities that extended far beyond family approval or disapproval. I have to take this, I said, answering the phone as I walked back toward Derek's house. Behind me, I could hear the collective sigh of frustration from my family, and Derek's voice saying, "This is exactly what we're talking about." He chooses work over family, every single time. As I stepped inside to take the call that would determine my next several hours, I realized that the gap between my family's perception and my reality was about to become impossible to bridge through explanations or diplomacy. Soon, they would understand exactly what kind of work demanded my attention on Saturday evenings, and exactly what level of responsibility required immediate responses to Pentagon phone calls. Inside Derek's house, I found myself standing in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of his real estate success, framed photographs of commercial developments, awards from the County Business Association, and a large mahogany desk that dominated the room. Through the windows, I could see my family on the patio, their animated gestures suggesting they were discussing my latest breach of social etiquette. "General Anderson," came the authoritative voice of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin through my encrypted phone, "I need your immediate assessment of the Baltic situation. The Russians have positioned 3 submarines in international waters, but their tactical formation suggests potential preparation for aggressive action." The gravity in the Secretary's voice immediately focused my attention away from family dynamics and onto the international crisis that was developing in real time. This wasn't a routine briefing or consultation. This was a potential Article 5 scenario that could trigger NATO's collective defense obligations. "Mr. Secretary," I replied, automatically shifting into the professional tone I used for high-level briefings, "what's our current intelligence on their submarine capabilities and likely mission parameters?" "That's exactly what I need you to determine," Secretary Austin continued. "The President is concerned about escalation potential, and the Joint Chiefs want your strategic assessment before we brief Congress tomorrow morning." Through the office window, I could see Derek gesturing toward the house, apparently explaining to the family that I was once again prioritizing work over family relationships. The irony of the moment, discussing global security strategy while being criticized for poor work-life balance, wasn't lost on me. I'll need access to the latest satellite imagery and sonar tracking data, I said, checking my watch and calculating the timeline for a comprehensive analysis. Already being transmitted to your secure terminal, the secretary replied. General Harrison will patch you into the Joint Intelligence Briefing in 10 minutes. The Situation Room is standing by for your preliminary assessment. As I ended the call with the Secretary of Defense, my phone immediately rang again. This time, the caller ID showed White House Situation Room, which meant the crisis had escalated to the highest levels of government attention. I answered quickly, knowing that calls from the Situation Room weren't kept waiting. General Anderson. General, this is Margaret Chen, National Security Advisor, came the familiar voice of one of the President's closest advisors. The President wants your recommendation on military response options. How quickly can you provide a strategic assessment? The mention of response options meant they were already considering potential military action, which elevated the seriousness of the situation significantly. The President didn't request military response assessments unless diplomatic solutions were proving inadequate. Ma'am, I can have preliminary options within 30 minutes, but I'll need secure access to current naval positioning data and rules of engagement protocols, I replied, mentally organizing the analysis framework I'd need to provide accurate recommendations. Understood. We're establishing a secure link to your location now. The President will want to hear directly from you during tonight's emergency briefing. As I ended the call with the National Security Advisor, I realized that my family conversation would have to wait. The developing international situation required immediate attention, and my responsibilities as a senior military commander took precedence over social obligations. I stepped back onto the patio, where my family was deep in discussion about my apparent inability to disconnect from work. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw me approaching, and I could feel the collective weight of their disapproval settling over the evening air. Michael, my father said with obvious frustration, surely whatever this is can wait until you get home. You've been on the phone for 20 minutes during what's supposed to be family time. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed something that would be visible to anyone nearby. General Harrison, Joint Chiefs. The family fell silent as they processed what they'd just seen on my phone screen. Derek's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, while Rachel stared at the phone display as if she were reading a foreign language. I'm sorry, I have to take this, I said, answering the call while remaining close enough to the family that they could hear portions of the conversation. Mike, came General Harrison's familiar voice, loud enough that the family could clearly hear both sides of the conversation. The President wants you in the Situation Room within the hour. This Baltic situation is escalating faster than we anticipated. Understood, Marcus, I replied, using the chairman's first name as I always did during informal conversations. What's the current assessment from Northcom and EUCOM? Both commands are recommending immediate strategic response. The Russians are testing our resolve, and the President needs your expertise on submarine warfare tactics before we brief NATO leadership. Kevin's mouth had fallen open as he processed the conversation he was overhearing. The words President, NATO leadership, and submarine warfare tactics didn't fit with their image of me as a low-level government administrator. I'll need to leave immediately to reach Washington, I said, knowing that the family was absorbing every word of the conversation. Roger that. I'll have Marine One pick you up at Westchester Airport. The pilot is already en route. The mention of Marine One, the President's helicopter, caused Bradley to drop his bourbon glass, which shattered against Derek's expensive patio stones. The sound of breaking glass punctuated the moment as the family realized they'd been listening to something far beyond their comprehension. Copy, Marcus. I'll be at the airport in 20 minutes, I said, ending the call and turning to face my family's stunned expressions. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stood frozen near his outdoor bar, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process what he'd just heard. Rachel's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the shock on her face, while my father simply stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Did he just say Marine One? Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle hum of Derek's outdoor sound system. That's impossible, Rachel said, her marketing executive confidence cracking as she tried to rationalize what she'd just witnessed. Marine One is the president's helicopter. There must be some mistake. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure messaging app that connected me directly to military command centers around the world. The screen displayed a constant stream of updates from NATO headquarters, Pentagon operations centers, and field commanders reporting on the developing crisis. "There's no mistake," I said quietly, holding up the phone so they could see the steady flow of classified communications. "This is what I do." Derek found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "What exactly do you do, Mike?" Before I could answer, another call came through. This time, I put it on speaker so the family could hear the conversation clearly. "General Anderson," came the voice of Admiral Rodriguez from NATO Joint Force Command. "The situation has escalated. Russian naval forces are moving toward Estonian territorial waters. We need immediate authorization for defensive positioning of our submarine assets." "Admiral," I replied, using the calm, authoritative tone that had guided me through dozens of similar crisis situations. "What's our current rules of engagement status with SACEUR?" "Sir, Supreme Allied Commander Europe has authorized defensive measures, but we need your assessment on escalation potential before implementing active sonar tracking." The family listened in stunned silence as I coordinated international military responses to a developing crisis. The technical language, the casual use of military acronyms, and the obvious difference of senior officers painted a picture that completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life and career. "I'll provide a strategic assessment within the hour," I told Admiral Rodriguez. "Coordinate with General Harrison's staff for secure transmission of my recommendations." As I ended the call, I looked around at my family's shocked faces. 23 years of assuming I was a disappointment, a family failure, a man who'd chosen mediocrity over success, had just been shattered by a few minutes of overhead conversation. "I have to go," I said simply, checking my watch and calculating travel time to the airport. "There's an international crisis that requires my immediate attention." The understatement hung in the evening air as my family tried to process the complete reversal of everything they'd believed about my life, my career, and my capabilities. I gathered my suit jacket from Derek's guest closet, my movements efficient and purposeful as years of military training kicked in. The family remained frozen on the patio, their conversations reduced to whispered fragments as they tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Through the windows, I could see them huddled together, their body language suggesting intense debate about the reality they'd just discovered. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from my driver. "General, arriving at location in 3 minutes. Marine 1 ETA to Westchester Airport, 18 minutes." Kevin appeared in the doorway, his young face still displaying the shock of someone whose worldview had just been completely restructured. "Uncle Mike, I don't understand. How long have you been, whatever you actually are?" 23 years, I replied simply, checking that I had my secure communication devices and identification cards needed for Pentagon access. 23 years, he repeated slowly. "You've been doing this for 23 years, and we never knew?" Rachel pushed past Kevin into the hallway, her marketing executive composure completely shattered. "Michael, this is insane. You let us criticize you, lecture you about success, offer you jobs. Why didn't you ever tell us the truth?" The question struck at the heart of everything that had gone wrong with my family relationships. They couldn't understand that secrecy wasn't about pride or games. It was about operational security and the safety of the people who depended on classified information remaining classified. "Because the work requires discretion," I said, the same explanation I'd given to congressional oversight committees when they questioned military classification protocols. Derek appeared behind Rachel, his real estate developer confidence replaced by something approaching humility. "Mike, when you say discretion, what exactly do you mean? What's your actual rank?" Before I could answer, my phone rang with another call from the Pentagon. This time, I answered it in front of them, letting them hear the conversation that would answer Derek's question more effectively than any explanation I could provide. "Major General Anderson," came the voice of Colonel Walsh, using my full rank and title as military protocol required during crisis situations. "Go ahead, Patricia," I replied, noting how the family's expressions shifted when they heard the words, "Major General." Sir, the President has requested that you chair tomorrow's Joint Chiefs briefing on Baltic response options. Secretary Austin wants your strategic assessment to drive NATO's unified response protocol. Rachel's legs seemed to give out slightly, and she leaned against the wall for support. The words President, Joint Chiefs, and NATO were connecting in her mind to create a picture that contradicted decades of assumptions about my life and capabilities. Understood, I replied. I'll review the classified briefing materials during transport and have recommendations ready for the morning's session. As I ended the call, Derek's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Major General. You're a Major General in the United States Army. That's correct, I said, checking my watch and noting that my transportation would arrive momentarily. How many people does a Major General command? Kevin asked, his finance education finally providing him with the analytical framework to ask the right questions. It varies by assignment, I replied. Currently, about 30,000 personnel across multiple commands. The number hung in the air like a revelation. Bradley, who had been conspicuously absent from the hallway conversation, appeared from the patio with the look of someone who'd been frantically Googling military ranks on his phone. 30,000, Bradley repeated, his cryptocurrency millions suddenly seeming less impressive. Mike, do you realize that makes you responsible for more people than most Fortune 500 CEOs? My father emerged from the patio, moving slowly like a man who'd aged several years in the past 20 minutes. His expression carried the weight of a lifetime of misjudgments about his eldest son's choices and capabilities. Michael, he said, his voice lacking its usual authority, I need to understand something. When we talked about your financial situation, your future planning, your lack of advancement, you knew all along that we were completely wrong about everything? The question contained layers of pain that went beyond simple embarrassment. My father was realizing that he'd spent 2 decades offering career advice to someone who outranked most of the military commanders he'd read about in newspapers. I tried to tell you that I was content with my choices, I said gently. I tried to explain that my work had meaning and importance. Amanda appeared with my car keys, which I'd forgotten in the kitchen during dinner. Her hostess instincts remained intact, even as her understanding of her brother-in-law underwent complete reconstruction. Michael, she said quietly, when you said you traveled for work, you meant international crisis response, NATO coordination, congressional briefings, strategic planning sessions with allied military commanders, I explained. Last month I was in Brussels for a week, working with European defense ministers. Rachel's marketing mind was apparently beginning to process the implications of what she'd learned. The clothes, the car, the modest lifestyle, that was all intentional? Operational security, I confirmed. High-ranking military officers can become targets if their identity and location are too easily determined. Living modestly provides both security and flexibility. A black sedan pulled into Derek's driveway, followed immediately by 2 additional vehicles that I recognized as military security escort cars. Through the windows, I could see uniformed personnel taking positions around the property perimeter. Sir, came a voice from outside, Marine One is inbound to Westchester Airport. We need to depart immediately. I turned to my family, who were now staring out the windows at what was clearly a high-level military security operation unfolding in Derek's suburban driveway. I have to go, I said. There are people depending on the decisions I'll make tonight. 3 days later, the Baltic crisis had been resolved through a combination of diplomatic pressure and strategic military positioning that helped convince Russian forces to withdraw from contested waters. The successful de-escalation made international headlines, though my role in coordinating the response remained classified. I returned to Derek's house on Tuesday afternoon to collect the personal items I'd left behind during my hasty departure. The family had gathered again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The judgment and condescension had been replaced by something approaching awe, mixed with a healthy dose of embarrassment. Michael, my father said as I entered the living room, I owe you an apology. We all do. No apology necessary, I replied, meaning it sincerely. You reacted based on the information you had available. Derek stepped forward. His real estate developer confidence replaced by genuine humility. Mike, I've been thinking about this for 3 days straight. When I offered you a job at my company, Jesus, that must have sounded incredibly condescending. You were trying to help, I said diplomatically. Rachel had printed out several articles about the Baltic crisis resolution, along with a Department of Defense press release that mentioned, quote, senior military leadership coordinating the successful diplomatic outcome. This was you, wasn't it? She asked, holding up the news coverage. This international crisis that got resolved. You were part of making that happen. It was a team effort involving multiple agencies and allied nations, I replied, maintaining the same discretion that had governed my career for over 2 decades. Kevin, who had been unusually quiet since my revelation, finally spoke up. Uncle Mike, I've been reading about military ranks and responsibilities. A major general, that's really high up, isn't it? There are higher ranks, I said simply. But not many, Bradley added, having apparently done his own research. Mike, I looked up the military chain of command. You're basically 2 levels below the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The family absorbed this information with visible discomfort, each of them remembering specific moments from Saturday night when they'd lectured me about success, ambition, and life planning. When you said you had financial security, my mother said quietly, what exactly did you mean? Military pension, healthcare benefits, housing allowances, and other compensation that comes with senior command positions, I explained. I'm quite comfortable financially. Uncle Stephen, who had delivered the harshest criticism about being a family disappointment, cleared his throat awkwardly. Michael, when I said those things about you being, about the family reputation, I had no idea. You couldn't have known, I replied. The nature of the work requires maintaining operational security, even with family. Derek shook his head slowly. Mike, do you realize that while we were sitting here talking about our little business successes, you were literally coordinating international military strategy? While I was bragging about a $40 million real estate deal, you were making decisions that affect global security? The comparison highlighted the fundamental difference between our definitions of importance and success. Their achievements were significant within their respective industries, but my responsibilities operated on a completely different scale of impact and consequence. Different types of work serve different purposes, I said diplomatically. Your business success contributes to economic stability and community development. Military service protects the framework that makes civilian success possible. Rachel wiped away tears that had been building since my arrival. Michael, I feel terrible about the things we said. About calling you pathetic. About suggesting you'd wasted your potential. You were concerned about someone you love, I interrupted gently. That concern came from a good place, even if the assumptions were incorrect. My father stood up slowly, his age showing more than it had just a few days earlier. Son, I need you to know something. I've spent my entire adult life measuring success by business achievement, financial accumulation, social status. But what you've accomplished, the responsibility you carry, the service you've provided to this country, I'm proud of you in ways I don't know how to express. The words carried more weight than any promotion or commendation I'd ever received. For 23 years, I'd served my country without needing my family's approval or understanding. But hearing those words from my father meant more than I'd expected. Thank you, Dad, I said simply. As I prepared to leave, Kevin approached with a question that showed he'd been thinking deeply about the revelations of the past few days. Uncle Mike, what's the most important thing you've learned from your career? I considered the question carefully, thinking about the lessons that 23 years of military service had taught me about leadership, sacrifice, and purpose. That true strength doesn't need to announce itself, I said finally. That the most important work often happens quietly, without recognition or applause. And that success isn't about what other people think of your choices. It's about knowing that your choices serve something greater than yourself. The family nodded thoughtfully, perhaps beginning to understand that their nephew and brother had been teaching them those lessons all along, simply through the example of how he'd chosen to live his life. As I drove away in my faithful Honda Civic, I reflected on the irony that it had taken an international crisis to help my family understand what I'd been trying to tell them for years, that some forms of success can't be measured by conventional standards, and that the most important achievements are often the ones that remain hidden from public view. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in proving people wrong, but in quietly serving a purpose so important that personal recognition becomes irrelevant. The Baltic crisis was resolved, NATO alliance relationships were strengthened, and potential military conflict had been averted through careful diplomatic and strategic coordination. And if my family never fully understood the details of what I did, at least they now understood that their assumptions about failure and success had been based on a very narrow definition of what it means to make a difference in the world. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.